Kitsap Sun's editorial board. We're talking to County Commissioner Charlotte Garrido, who's running for re-election in District 2, South Kitsap seat. And so what we usually do is ask you to take 2 minutes and kind of remind us who you are, tell us why you decided to run again, and then we'll do some questions from there.
Well, I am Charlotte Garrido. I've had the honor of being a commissioner for the last 7 years, and in addition to that, for a 4-year term in the late 90s. I enjoy the job. Obviously, it's a complex job, and yet there's much yet to be done. I've started a lot of projects and would like to make sure that I have time to be able to follow through on some of them. As many of you know, the Board of County Commissioners are the legislative and the executive branch of county government, so that we are responsible to make sure that we have policies in place to deliver the efficient, accessible, and equitable policies and services to Kitsap County residents. Our single largest policy document is the county budget, which is the general fund is about $90 million a year, and then with all of our special purpose funds, it goes about $385 million a year. That means that we have we need to know enough detail about some of the things that are going on to make good calls on how the expenditures are placed. We have 8 departments that report directly to us. Those include the internal departments of Information Services, Administrative Services, which does do the budget, Human Resources, which is personnel, and Facilities. Our community-facing departments are Public Works, Department of Community Development, Parks, and Human Services. Those are some pretty exciting things to be working directly with, and yet each of them is so different that it's great to be able to figure out how they fit together and how we deliver the services as a single county government rather than as a collection of departments. And so, as I said, I really enjoy the job. I enjoy the people I work with in county government, and I really enjoy the citizens that I serve, and probably public participation is I believe that our future depends on a strong economy, a healthy environment, and people working together. And so those are my priorities as a county commissioner, and that's what I work on all the time.
Let me ask you this. If someone said, Charlotte, what have you done for me as a resident of South Kitsap during your term so far? How do you answer that? What do you say? These are the things that I'm proud that I do, and tangible stuff.
I'm really proud of some of the neighborhood work I'm doing. I'm actually trying to initiate an Office of Neighborhoods in Kitsap County. Rather than having us rely on citizen advisory committees, I'd like to have a more equal partnership with the people who live in communities, so if I can help strengthen them as friends and neighbors and people who live in a community, strengthen their ability to facilitate their own messages, then it's easier for us to come in as partners who have services for their community and work equally with them.
That's kind of a volunteer role, is kind of what you're getting at there?
As citizens?
Yeah, this Office of Neighborhoods would be, is that what you're saying? That kind of get folks in neighborhoods?
Actually, I look at, the closest example to us is in Seattle. They have an Office of Neighborhoods for 30 years, but we've actually looked at offices of neighborhoods in counties and cities across the nation just to kind of get a sense of how they work. It's not like we have a volunteer coordinator, and we have thousands, lots and lots of volunteers. But no, this is more working on people, neighbors, communities' terms of what's important to them in their community, and helping them maybe learn facilitation skills so that they have the ability to determine and work within their own community as a viable entity.
And this is kind of from a communications, is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah.
That you would hear directly from neighborhoods
Yeah.
on what their needs are and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How does that occur now? How do you feel that you get that input now, and maybe what neighborhoods are you focused on? Where do you see things happen?
Well, some neighborhoods are more organized already, and the Manchester Community Advisory Committee is one that has existed since 2009, and actually they were ad hoc before then. And so, I think a really good example is the harbor community, because we got some funding to restore the functions of the estuary. And in order for us to be able to do that, it's important to work with the community. And so we've had lots of community meetings where we just invite the community to come. But we're just keeping them briefed about what we're doing, and at the same time, we're asking them what they care about their community. We started by going actually to homes and asking people if they would have a few neighbors in to talk, and that was less intimidating about government talking to them, and grew into larger gatherings so that there developed a sense of trust and ability to communicate in a more balanced way.
The comp plan is something we've been asking all the candidates about, and you're knee deep in this, I know, because it's getting kind of towards the end of it now. And obviously in the last couple public hearings, you've heard from a lot of the people who like them or don't like them, letting you know what they think. My question kind of was your own interpretation of how you think the comp plan process has gone. Do you feel like you've heard from people, how you feel the county's responded to that to do a responsible plan, and then kind of also give us a sense of your vision of South Kitsap and what in that plan matches up with what you think direction the city is.
It's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know, I should break them up.
But I don't know if you know this about me, but actually that's kind of what got me into political activities. Is when I moved to Kitsap County, I wanted to meet my neighbors, and it just so happened that they had a comprehensive planning process that started a few months after we arrived here. And we were invited to talk with our neighbors about what we liked and what we thought, what we saw in the future of our neighborhood. And as it moved through the process, through the Planning Commission, it became less familiar and less like what I thought I saw in the community, and less like what I thought my neighbors and I viewed the future of the community. And then when it went through the Board of County Commissioners, it was really a foreign language. It was very bureaucratic. And so that has caused me to be very active in this community for nearly 40 years. Volunteering for lots and lots of organizations, serving on appointed boards, etc. And then going back to school and get a master's and a doctorate in urban planning so that I could speak this language and translate it back and translate people talk back into it. And I think it's a long process to be able to do that. I believe what we call comprehensive planning has really adopted its own language to the extent that it's really, really tough for the average person to feel any connection at all to it. So to talk about how we've done with the latest one, I went out to those neighborhood groups that we had been talking to and began to say, so what do you like about your neighborhood? We took lists of what people liked about their neighborhood and what they wanted it to look like in the future without using any comprehensive plan language. We were listening to their language and then come back and talk to them. We heard you say you really liked the beautiful vistas from your community. No matter what community it was, they loved their natural setting. They loved their neighbors. They liked the walkability. Those were some of the very fundamental things. They liked their schools. They liked their parks. And it didn't matter how different they were from one another. Those were important to the people that lived in their communities. Well, our comprehensive plan reflects that to a certain extent, and yet I don't know that I could really say that it personalizes individual communities in the way that I still dream of us being able to get to.
So do you live in Manchester?
I live in Olalla.
Oh, okay, you've lived there, I guess, for a long time, huh?
Yep, since 1978.
Okay.
One of the things, Olalla, that's kind of that rural area.
Yeah.
That I know exactly what you mean when people, the vistas and a lot of South Kitsap probably especially is that way, with people being protective of that. There's also the idea that, this growth coming around Port Orchard, some of the new businesses that have been on the fringes there, which are in the UGA. And the one that I think we've had in the news most often is that Phillips Road area off Sedgwick there, where there is some development starting, some you know, issues about utilities going there and what's gonna be built and the landowners, you know, do we want this? Do we not like all the development? So maybe that's kind of what I was asking with the vision question is,
Okay.
how do you see South Kitsap? Is it reasonable to think, yeah, the UGA is gonna fill up a lot and we are gonna have this? Are you comfortable with kind of the zoning densities that appear there right now? When you look out into the future, what's this place gonna look like? What's your vision?
Well, we're only planning for 20 years for this, within this comprehensive plan. And I believe that we listen to the South Kitsap residents' concerns about, and you talked about the UGA, the urban growth area. There were some concerns that we heard of out Phillips Road and even over along Sydney on the west side. And we actually talked with the city of Port Orchard often, and in their meetings, and they met with us and with the citizens who had concerns. So we heard I went to city council meetings, a couple of them, and I heard what people were saying to them, and then they heard what the mayor did come a couple of ours, and he heard what people were saying to us. So that we were able, as governments, to be able to talk, but to also be able to listen to the citizens who were being the most impacted by the decisions that we were making. And I think that's important.
With the parks issue, you said people love their parks, that's what you've heard. How do you see the future? Actually, this editorial board took a tour of some North Kitsap parks just yesterday. And one of the things, I know the county is trying to make more of these places accessible. There's a lot that are on the books that are not accessible, that haven't been used. There's kind of that's a balance of where you put the money to, you know, be able to make these usable places. When you see, especially the kind of, how are we gonna pay for parks question, what are we gonna do from the county perspective in the coming years?
So we've actually done some pretty interesting things. The acquisition has been going on pretty aggressively, not so much except for the north end, for probably 20 years. So Kitsap County owns a lot of parkland, and we have community parks and heritage parks, and what's the other one? We have 3 categories of parks. So
Is that the third one?
no, it's not. I've got it here someplace. I can't see it right now. So, I can't see it, but I'll find it for you. So we've got the 200-acre community park, and then we've got larger parks, and then we've got the usually 1,000+ heritage parks. So the real question is how we're going to maintain the parks that we already own more than anything. Or when, like, Anderson Point Park had a washout, and it took 3 years for us to be able to acquire and repair. It was on a pretty dramatic steep slope. But, for example, Horseshoe Lake Park is down in the South Kitsap area, close to our south boundary with Pierce County. And we had to close a lot of parks during the recession. And Peninsula Parks is a parks district in Pierce County. And they started talking to us about how we might be able to keep that park open. They open it during the summer. They run it 3 days a week, and we do 40 days a week. We do the maintenance. But we know that we're serving that just as many Pierce County people are probably using it as Kitsap County people anyway, but it's a very well-loved park and a well-used park. What better solution is that than having a partnership that helps keep the park open and yet we don't empty our
Or
coffers.
that's similar to Wildcat Lake a couple of years
Yeah,
ago, where it
yeah,
had to be
and
limited on
the
days, and
tri-days
then you
do
had
that.
volunteer
Mhm.
groups and things like that. And volunteers have obviously been a big part of parks.
And should be. And that's one of the things that neighborhoods really like to do is they like to, I mean, that's one of the easy things. They love their park anyway. It's right there. They use it all the time. And often we're finding that it is neighbors who really like to take on a stewardship responsibility whether it's, Banner Forest or South Kitsap Region.
Should options like selling certain parks, or not the parks, but property that isn't being, there are places that aren't developed as parks that the county owns.
Mhm.
Should things like that be considered? Should a parks district be considered? Do you worry about any ideas like that to make sure there is revenue to pay for these things?
I wouldn't hasten to that decision. South Kitsap Regional used to be a parks district, and I was a parks commissioner for that district. And one of the problem we had is once voters voted to purchase it as a park, we could never again pass a levy to maintain that park, ever. So we had this 200-acre park that was in a very urban area, but it was wooded, and it was a really beautiful park. And as park commissioners, we were emptying the garden. I mean, we were doing fundraisers and everything else to try to maintain it, but we couldn't. So North Kitsap has been very successful with the Parks District. I still wouldn't rush to it. I believe that if the citizens of Kitsap want to have parks, we need to figure out ways to have relationships so that they can help us steward those parks and keep them.
Is the situation like with the Rotary Park here in town, is that a concept that could enable
Mhm.
the furtherance of?
Sure, I think so. The other thing I'm thinking about, for example, with Howe Farm, which is 83 acres, it's, about half cleared, kind of cleared, and half wooded. And we just repaired the 1920s part of the barn and just refinishing the 1940s part of the barn, and it's just beautiful. My thought is, we don't really tell the history of agriculture very well in Kitsap County, and why not have a living museum by creating partnerships, and we're talking to the Historical Society and other groups. How about having partnerships so that we are mutually maintaining and something that is more than just a place to play. It is also telling a story about our own heritage. And I
There's
think
one of them up there north, has a trail that goes through an old, homesteading farm. It tells you, it has little plaques, tells you the history of the family that lived there.
in North Kitsap.
Yeah,
Where?
I think it's, near.
You're not talking about Peterson Farm, are you?
That's CK.
No, it's off of, Big Valley or something, I think, something that way. Yeah.
Well, I'll have to ask Commissioner Gelder about that.
I'd like to ask you about the transportation
Okay.
situation in the county. What is your position on the fast ferry?
I'm on the
Okay.
Kitsap Transit Board and on the passenger-only ferry subcommittee of the Transit Board. I believe that we are a peninsula nearly surrounded by water, and that historically that we did have water transportation. We currently have water transportation provided by Washington State ferries. So those are our state highways that go across the water. I would like to see passenger-only ferry service available as well. I'm not as happy with this particular ballot measure at 0.3%. I would like to see us explore other funding opportunities rather than going clear to 0.3%.
Would you be comfortable with a lower amount, or is it
I would.
the method in general, not necessarily, it's the amount?
Yeah,
Oh, it's the amount.
It's the amount.
Bothers you?
Should the plan, is that because, would you be comfortable with the plans scaling back, or and I'm gonna ask you this particularly because your district, is
Yeah.
Southworth an important part to have?
Oh,
in that?
absolutely, and Southworth would be the third to be
Right.
added. Bremerton would come first, and then Kingston, and then Southworth. So of course, South Kitsap residents are telling me that we should be just as early as the other two. At the same time, we would require either a different vessel or a different landing than currently exists. I just think that it's something that we should be looking at and looking at creatively, because I think it works. I've also been very, very involved for many years on the Ferry Community Partnership, and that is looking at the Washington State ferries. So we're a group that meets throughout the year, but especially during the legislative session, we meet weekly on a Saturday morning and talk about the ferry service and what kinds of legislation we need to be supporting or designing during the legislative session. And we've done some pretty creative things about looking at service, recommending to WSF the kinds of attention that they should be giving us as their customers. We do know about service, and we could lend some really valuable ideas to them. And just think that they should be attending to those.
Do you think this is a good time for Kitsap Transit to be asking this question?
It's when it came to us, you know, and it's actually been a question out there since the 1990s when Washington State ferries had difficulty with the service in Rich Passage. And there was harm happening on the Bainbridge Island side and the South Kitsap side because it's a unique passage. It's very narrow. I mean, it doesn't that situation doesn't exist anyplace else in Kitsap County, so that we would only run into it. And we do need a different kind of vessel there, but it's been looked at for a long time, and we have a vessel that does travel through at the speeds that it needs to travel through. We have tested it. We know that it does work. So I think what we need to do is talk more with people who want to use the service and who want to be supportive of the service about how they can be even more supportive.
Talk about just the county's other transportation needs. And the Gorse is the one that
Yeah.
always comes up for people in your district.
Indeed. Actually, the whole county.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
that's everybody. It's not just them. But give us your sense of that. What should the county be planning on? What's their role in making that situation better?
So just to be clear, this is a state highway.
Correct.
So Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council has been telling Washington State Department of Transportation for many years that is a key place for attention for Kitsap County. And in fact, many times we've actually said a bridge would be a really good solution, and have been told bluntly by Department of Transportation that that's never going to happen. So we've gone back and forth on that. About 2 years ago at Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, we began to talk about the West Sound Alliance as a West Sound Alliance to begin to come together even with Mason County and Pierce County and throughout Kitsap County, the cities, of how we were going to be looking at transportation. And I brought up to KRCC that really Gorst is our pinch point, and it's not only for South Kitsap, it's for the whole county. And you know, North Kitsap was definitely supportive of that position as well. So we looked for funding and found some funding to do a feasibility study, because actually you can't just widen through Gorst. I mean, there's this water here and rock there, so it's not just a regular kind of job to address. And especially that railroad bridge is really sort of the choker. And so the feasibility study was approved and you know, is being docketed now, of how we can actually create more capacity through Gorst. And we're looking at it. We actually found that we could fund it more easily and actually create a higher urgency to it by looking at it as a freight corridor. It does fit that designation. So
Does that get you more money if you're a freight corridor?
it accesses different funding,
Oh,
but
okay.
actually it's a priority,
Yeah,
because
so I
when
was
you look
thinking
at
it gives you a higher priority.
freight across the state, and there's that choke point for freight. So by doing that, and it was one of our planners who came up with that idea, it really does put it on a faster track.
And so the feasibility study sits with the state?
Yeah.
Is that where it goes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Goes from the alliance up to the state for
Yeah,
when they
found
do
some funding.
their sort of rankings. Similar thing to the Belfair bypass where it's on a list. And
Well,
you
actually,
wanna
we're
get
doing
this
we're
higher
doing the
level.
feasibility and then we'll pass the information to them.
Okay, still in the process of doing the feasibility.
Yeah,
is what it
yeah.
is.
I'd like to ask a question on the size of county government and the number of county commissioners compared to other counties. What's your feeling about, is it right sized, do we have the right number? It's a question I've asked other people, just want to get your opinion.
The right number of commissioners?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a terrific question. I will tell you that 3 commissioners for a county this size and population of Kitsap is a tremendously heavy job. It would be much easier to have 5. And yet we have brought on a county administrator in the last 10 years or 12 years, which does help us delegate at least the administrative part of a lot of the detail.
So what are these projects? You started out saying that, there's projects you want to finish. What are they?
Well, the neighborhood one is
Is
really
that-
a big one for me because it's a cultural change and it's a fun project to begin to work with different neighborhoods and work with staff to decide what are some of the methods that we're going to be using or that we are using and that work well and how do you have those different kinds of conversations. Another project that I have worked on is creating a food policy council. Every person in the county eats food, and it affects our economy. I mean, why are we not growing more of the food that we're eating instead of importing it? It affects our health, and it affects our social well-being. Local food shared is, look at the Bremerton Farmers Market and what a social occasion that is. We can
Well-
come around together around food in a way that all of us can agree on.
What would that council help do?
They did a lot of policies for the updated comprehensive plan. And we've
Protecting
never
rural.
had, protecting rural land, but also encouraging policies that allow people to stay on the land or young people to be able to become access land. It's not all about land. It's about also, it's actually the food system is growing, processing, distributing, accessing. All people should be able to access, and then managing the waste. And when you look at it as a system, we've actually lost a lot of that system through the 50s, after World War II. We began to corporatize the food that we eat, and it became much more normal to buy everything rather than to supply some of your own and have it very fresh.
Other than I guess I can understand growing in my head as far as policy,
Mhm.
You protect lands, and how does policy affect some of those other factors?
Well, actually, food access, everybody should have access, and so food policy to make sure that even people who can't afford farmers market food can still avail themselves of fresh strawberries or,
Well, actually, they do have, the Paulsville Farmers Market anyway has
yes,
the WIC. I mean,
Yes.
you can
Yeah.
use whatever those WIC dollars to buy stuff at the farmers market.
and seniors have a program as well.
Now, what about the budget? That's another thing you talk about a lot. That seems to be
It's kind of a big deal.
what's your concern about the budget?
I don't know that I have a concern as much as making sure that, I'm elected to be fiscally conservative about the taxpayer dollars that we spend. And that means I really need to be paying attention to everything that we're doing in terms of expenditures. So we do a pretty rigorous budget process. We annually adopt our budget in December, but we start in August by having hearings with every department about what their requests for the budget are. And and that goes on for quite a long time. Each commissioner is able to appoint one citizen representative to sit with us, or sit with the board, as we hear these and as we deliberate what we've heard from each department. I have appointed Jim Carmichael, who's a retired banker, who asks absolutely, and all of them ask questions that we may or may not have thought of, but he asks really tough questions that I might not have thought of, and so it's very, very helpful to have that little bit of expansion on the kinds of questions we're asking. And we've introduced lean process improvement, so that we obviously are asking, if you're doing lean process improvement in your department, how does that affect your budget, and how are you reducing, you had to reduce some of the wasteful steps that you were doing of your processes in your department. How does that reduce your budget, or how has that impacted your budget? So it gives us the opportunity to ask different questions just by other processes that we're introducing as well.
You just referenced kind of those recession years when the county, like a lot of agencies and businesses, did a lot of cuts and merged things. Looking at property values right now and my own property tax bill, and as we all see that, I'm speculating a little bit, but I have to think the county's getting into a better budget position based somewhat on those things. So when you look at that and perhaps expecting that, what's at the top of your list to, we really tightened our belt on all these things, what are your priorities now? What's at the top of the list to now we'd like to start to address this?
So one of the things that we did do is a compensation survey about a year and a half ago to look at the salaries and the benefits that our employees receive. And so we compared what our rates are with other similarly sized organizations, similar organizations, and we came up. We had actually a consultant did this for us, and it actually is costing us quite a lot to make some of the changes that were recommended, because we were behind in some cases, and that's causing us to readjust our own structure. So we certainly went through some very difficult times when we were going through a recession, and did close the building, our administrative building, 1 day a week for quite a long time, to be able to to reduce our expenditures. And we asked a lot of the staff, and we worked with the staff and the other electeds to determine how we were going to come out of the recession. I think it was one of the most collaborative things that it was the best way we could have addressed that. And I believe some of the steps and the measures that departments introduced at the time, they've held on to, because it did cause us to take a breath and take a look at how we did things and reduce some of the extra steps. And then the lean process improvement improved that too. But there are always new expenses that may not have been expected, and government can only increase by 1%, and often the cost of living is more than 1%. And certainly when we're offering cost of living increases for employees, they're more than 1%. So you still have to be careful all the time. Back to your question about what concerns me about the budget, you just have to look very, very carefully at just about everything that you do.
One of the things, I'm going to make a complicated question by tying two things together. One of the things that's happened while you've been on the commission is the mental health funding tax.
Yes, indeed.
Was passed, and that's in the process of the triage center. And so I guess I want to ask, is there anything beyond that plan at this point that you would like to see come next in that area?
In that package?
And then homelessness is the other thing that you organized a session last week, and so I'm tying those two together. I know they're not exactly the same thing, but in those kind of social service areas, if elected again, what do you see there?
Well, the 1/10% is something that the legislature allowed counties to be able to do, and we were slower than some counties to do it. We were helped along in our thinking by the League of Women Voters, and I'm grateful for that because they did some research that showed us why it was important, and really educated us and others within county government and within the community, which was valuable. What we've seen with the 1/10% is that every year we are able to grant initiatives that may be very different from the way that things happened before in mental health, substance abuse, or therapeutic court arenas. Some really inventive, really effective programs have received funding, and I don't think that those would have been imagined if we hadn't had the funding that caused people to say, let's put something different together. Let's start collaborating in a way across agencies or across initiatives in a way that we haven't done before. It's been really, really impressive. So I want to go right from there to the homelessness issue. By bringing together more than 55 agencies who've been talking about homelessness for years in the continuum of care into a workshop setting last week, and bringing a couple of speakers in to talk about what's possible in Utah, or how you build tiny houses from somebody who's had experience, and putting people together in conversations about how we can make that happen here, is also stimulating thoughts that hadn't occurred before or hadn't been imagined as possible here. And so I want to push the same kind of conversation that says, you know, homelessness is a really huge issue, and you weren't there, but we actually had a panel where there were 4 people who have been homeless, talking about what that experience is like.
Now, one of those people is a member of this
I know
editorial
that.
board. Drayton
Yeah.
spoke in that group.
Yeah.
To touch on what you just said, you said that one of the keys to the mental health
Was funding.
conversation was the funding.
Mhm.
How does that translate to what you're talking about with homelessness? Do we need to do a tax for that? Is there something that
You're
could be
jumping the
funded?
gun too
I am,
quickly here.
I'm pushing.
There's gonna have to be funding, yeah, but Lloyd Pendleton from Utah said, that's why the commissioners or other leaders need to take the leadership role, because there is gonna be a need for funding. And we have lots of wonderful folks and organizations in the county who wanna do programs. And they should be doing that and dreaming and helping us imagine what the costs are gonna be or what the answers are gonna be, so that we can begin to figure out whether it's gonna be a tax or whether there are other forms of funding. And I'm not sure that Utah did a new tax to be able to put their program together. And I know that Quixote Village is one of those tiny house villages in Olympia, and we've talked about what it looks like. We haven't talked about how it got paid for. And so, as a leader, I would think that it's my responsibility to begin to look at those funding realities and how to ground them.
Right.
So,
Oh, actually, we're getting,
I haven't talked about workforce
Do that,
development.
yeah.
One of my biggest passions is workforce development. I've been the chair of the Olympic Consortium, which is Clallam, Jefferson, Kitsap, for the last 7.5 years. And in my first term, I was also chair back then. What we work with is, now it's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act of 2014, which is funding to help create jobs. And we do that, the new formula from the Department of Labor is you talk to the companies about what kinds of employees they need, what kinds of skills they need their employees to have. And then you start putting together those kinds of classes through community colleges, et cetera, and developing the skills and then putting the potential employees together with the businesses. And I've been on a state steering committee to help implement that across Washington State. I think it's really, it's just such a simple formula, but it's pretty workable, and there's a special emphasis on internships and apprenticeships, and I think that's a wonderful way for people to be able to develop into jobs. So we have a council, I'm on the board, but there is a council which is quite large. For the 3 counties, it's a total of about 35 or 40 people, and they come from business and labor and education, and they're the ones who actually are charged with talking with the businesses and the CEOs of businesses to be able to determine what kinds of work is needed. I mean, it's really pretty intelligent how this has been put together. So we're looking at particularly industry sectors that exist here in our 3-county region and in Kitsap County. And the 2 that we are focused on first and foremost as the key industry sectors for the full region are healthcare and construction trades. And if you start looking around the landscape, you say, oh yeah, that's a real, those are the right ones.
Do you look to see how that applies to South Kitsap? I mean, since you're sort of focused on South Kitsap.
That's where I directly represent it,
Yeah, so, I mean, is this sort of what you're doing more of a county whole, or even beyond the county,
Mhm.
or is part of it how it serves your South Kitsap?
Obviously, I look at both. However, in only choosing 2, you're really developing the template that you will then be able to adopt into other industry sectors. And South Kitsap,
I don't know what their needs are.
Yeah. What we do is we look at the data and determine where the sectors are.
Now,
And
Olympic
where-
College,
yeah.
Olympic College did add the
Mhm.
BA in nursing, which I think
Mhm.
speaks to what you talked about, the healthcare need.
Yeah.
Is it mostly nursing when you say healthcare?
Well, yes, and nursing is a high priority, and it has been for years. I mean, years ago, I also, between times in office, I did some research for first WSU Extension and then for Kitsap Economic Development Alliance to help us decide how to have higher education in Kitsap County, and did a lot of look at the data of what kinds of industries we had, and healthcare has long been, and nursing is one of those professions that needs an increase in education so that we can make sure that people are going into it. One of the interesting things is that we discovered that high schools weren't really, the high school counselors were not recommending healthcare as a field to students, and so literally the Olympic Consortium set up in each of the hospitals in each county an opportunity for school counselors to visit the hospital and to be diagnosed with some malady, which they moved through then the hospital of being directed to the professionals in the fields that needed to deal with them, and they developed respect for that field of profession and began to recommend more students look at healthcare as a field, and especially nursing at the time.
Does OC have the capacity to
For-
grow its healthcare, to grow what it's providing? I mean, or maybe, is that what you would like to see then? Is the consortium trying to direct Olympic College, for example, to expand those?
And Olympic College is partnering also with Western, and so, and actually their nursing degrees are through UW. So, yeah, I mean, why not keep local students local and place them in jobs locally?
Are they, Olympic College, do you know are they having to turn people away who are interested in nursing, or is it more a question of they're not recruiting well enough, kind of the high school thing that you're talking about, to get more people interested in that?
I'm not sure that OC does all the recruiting. I'm saying that the high school actually helps students imagine themselves in careers while they're still in high school before they graduate. And I think if we raise the bar on discussion about what's possible locally, it makes it a lot more real for the students to imagine themselves staying here and fulfilling those occupations or fulfilling those student shares in their occupations.
I'm certainly not blaming them
No.
pointing that way, but more which side does this come from? Is it a lack of opportunity? There's not enough seats to turn out the people we need.
Let me give you my
Based on the
editorial,
evidence.
and that is that young people today, I don't think, are exposed to enough opportunities of what kinds of professions they may want to consider. And I'd really like to see somehow our community organize a little bit more connection between our young folks and professions, so that, even if they don't say as a senior graduating, this is what I want to do, in the back of their mind, I had that opportunity. I saw a lot of different kinds of professions, and I didn't see myself in some of the things I'm doing now, but because I had been exposed to that, it was something that when an opportunity came up, I accepted the opportunity.
And that kind of points towards a consortium of maybe saying, hey, K-12, all
Yeah.
through there you need to incorporate with
Yeah.
the world. Here's what you can do. You need to get to another meeting, and this is the time we had promised you. So what we always do at the end is give us a last, if there was something you wanted to touch on that you didn't get to, this is your chance. But also, I say, kind of the question is, tell us, if I'm a voter, what separates you from your opponents in this primary? Why would I choose you instead of the people you're running against? This is kind of a closing statement.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Some wonderful questions, and I wish I could have written them down. I guess I'll have to watch the tape here and see what you asked me so that I can send you back even fuller answers. I have the experience as a county commissioner. It is a job that requires a lot of knowledge, of good relationships, and an ability to work as a team member. And that is something that I have developed the ability to do. I have the experience with the kinds of topics and the work and the relationships that I need to be able to accomplish the job. I understand it. I've had successes as a commissioner, and I've learned from lots and lots of other people. I work hard. I like the job. I like the people that I work for, that I serve in Kitsap County. I'd love to continue working on behalf of Kitsap County, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about lots of details.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Good luck.